In this last one of this introductory series of videos, I want to tie the international political economy concepts we've been talking about much more explicitly back to international relations theories that we started the course with. Some of this I've said already, but I want to do so a little more systematically now because it's important. So liberalism. Liberalism basically talks about the theory of comparative advantage. And for liberalism, comparative advantage is the kind of crucial argument about why liberalism is right and realism is wrong, right? This idea that cooperation can make both states better off at the same time is really important. And that's talking about international relations theory. I should also point out that in the field of economics, if you go over to the economics department, this liberal view of free trade based on the theory of comparative advantage is absolutely the dominant view of trade, certainly in the United States, and I would say in most of the West, though there are people that are increasingly skeptical about some of the arguments that liberalism makes. Realism and economic structuralism both accept the basic argument about the comparative advantage, but they are much more focused on this question of how the gains from trade are divided. They're concerned about the distribution of wealth and power, right? Whereas liberalism, that's really not the question it asks. Liberalism's more about how can we all be better off? How can we increase the overall level of wealth and efficiency? Realism and economic structuralism are much more about, well, who gets what, right? When comparative advantage, when trade creates a gain, how does that gain get split up? That's really what they're focused on. And just to get back to this Pareto frontier diagram, realism, when it gets applied to international political economy, it has a couple of different names, Neomercantilism or economic nationalism. Neomercantilism refers back to the doctrine of mercantilism, which said there's a fixed amount of gold in the world, so whoever has more gold, somebody else is going to have less gold. So trade is a zero-sum game. And that was really the basis of a lot of colonial economics. Was mercantilism, try to extract wealth from one place and concentrate it somewhere else using the power of colonialism. Economic nationalism is slightly different. It's much more focused on this question of balance of trade and trying to drive up employment and wealth in one's country and not worry about what happens to somebody else. Okay, but for realism in particular, power is both the cause and an effect of the gains from trade. So, what determines where along the Pareto frontier you end up? If you're moving from here to there, are you going to move to here? Are you going to move to there? Or are you going to move somewhere else? And the realist answer is that's power, right? It's simply bargaining power or perhaps military threat. Some form of power determines who's going to get most of those gains from trade and who's going to get less of them. So power determines the outcome. The flip side of that is what's the impact of unequal distribution of the gains from trade? And again, realists are going to say, well, whoever has the bigger impact, whoever gets the more of the benefit, is going to have more money. And what do they do with it? They buy more weapons, or they have more economic power, which then allows them next time, right, to negotiate an even better distribution of the gains from trade. Now, in policy terms, when we think about things today, much of this debate is not about that exact debate, but again about the interest of workers, right? So if you hear Donald Trump, or for that matter, Joe Biden talk about these issues, they're going to talk about needing to do what's good for American workers, right? And so it's putting the interests of one country's workers ahead of those of another, and politicians obviously are much more concerned about the workers in their own country. Okay. And so this is a simple diagram that comes straight out of the book. The liberal view of trade and of the free market in general is that in free trade, both countries are going to get wealthier, right? But the poor country is going to catch up over time. And liberals are fine with that, right? Because that makes everybody better off. Liberals, I should point out, are also going to say the same thing within countries, that free markets are generally going to help poor people catch up to wealthy people, largely because their wages are expected to grow faster. Now, there's some real serious criticism as to whether that, in fact, is what takes place in the world. The realist and economic structuralist view is somewhat different, right? Their notion is that if you start ahead, then you're able to use that power that comes from that being ahead to make sure that each subsequent division of the gains of trade gets you even further ahead. So in the realist view, and in some versions of economic structuralism, the wealthy are even if the poor gets wealthier, right, the wealthy countries are going to grow faster. And again, they would say that's what happens inside countries. Even if poor people's wages are going up, right, Jeff Bezos is becoming a trillionaire in the meantime. Now, there are versions of economic structuralism that, in fact, are going to draw this blue line in a downward trend rather than an upward trend. And they're going to, some will argue, that not only does free trade spread that gap in wealth, but it actually makes the poor country absolutely poorer off. I'm not sure the data supports that, but it is an important argument. So economic structuralism then focuses really more on the effects of trade on individuals, right? When economic structuralists talk about state versus state, their arguments about trade sound very similar to those of realism. But what most economic structuralists are really interested in is what's happening with poor people, right, relative to rich people. And the argument is that free trade, because capitalists can easily move their money around the world, right, where it's much harder than for workers to move, that it actually facilitates the advantages of capitalists over workers, and that markets make it possible for capitalists to glom up an ever bigger share of the pie. Liberals, of course, stridently disagree, and I'll talk about their response in a minute. Social constructivism. What does constructivist international relations theory say? They don't take a position on which one of these theories is the correct one. Rather, they say it's the debate that matters, right? Over time, constructivists are going to say at some point in time, there was consensus on a lot of state intervention, for example. Things shifted in the 1980s and 90s to be where there was something that was called the Washington Consensus that was much more in favor of free trade. And when that happened, you saw lots of different behavior on the part of states. There's now actually an erosion of that consensus, and so social constructivists are going to talk about how perceptions of interest have changed, how shared purpose is eroding, and how that changes international negotiations and state policies. Lastly, feminism. Feminism has a whole range of critiques of this, and I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. One of this is feminism is going to say, look, none of anything I've said so far takes into account the fact that women's labor is almost always excluded from all of these analyses because women do a lot of work that don't make it into GDP figures, and so there's just a real incompleteness to this entire discussion. Moreover, they're going to argue there's not enough focus in any of this discussion on how trade and free trade and globalization impact women. In some respects, you can make the case that trade and globalization have very good impacts on some women, and in other cases may have very negative effects on other women. But the point feminists are going to make is that because women have been assigned different roles in economies around the world and stuck in different positions, free trade and globalization, or the absence of free trade and globalization, is going to affect women differently than men, and we need to keep an eye on that. The standard economic models that I've been using, right, these rational action models, game theory, the Pareto frontier, the prisoner's dilemma, many feminists are going to critique those models themselves, saying that this notion of the unitary rational actor is not only an abstraction, but it's a masculinist abstraction, right? And by assuming these disinterested, perfectly calculating rational actors, we've left a lot of important things out of the analysis, and we've biased things in a historically masculinist way. Put differently, right, the question that a lot of people are going to say should be asked, and feminists particularly will point to this, is what is economically rational is not, like, that's the question at the center of all this discussion, because that's how classical economics asks the question. And what feminism and what other perspectives are going to want to say is, wait a second, that's not the right question, or it's not the only question. How about what is ethical? How about what is fair? How about what's a decent living wage? These sorts of things. And so they want to broaden the agenda of this whole discussion. Now, the liberals have a response to all of this, and let me just summarize it real quickly, because I do think, at least historically, liberalism has been as sort of dominant, and it's the place where the debate begins on trade, just as realism has been the place that the debate begins on security. The liberal response to realism is, yeah, you can fight over the gains from trade, but all it's going to do is make everybody poor. And the power differentials that come from slight tweaks in the gains from trade are irrelevant compared to the losses you suffer because you're fighting over it. The responses to structuralism and feminism in different ways are going to be this, which is going to be careful what you wish for. If you think you've got too much free trade, look around. The people who are suffering the most in the world and are poorest in the world are not the ones who have been subjected to free trade. They're the ones who have been denied the opportunity for free trade. The market is liberal, means liberation, right? The market frees people up, and they're going to say the people who benefit the most from that are the ones who've historically been the most powerless. And that other forms of economic governance have historically oppressed women and the poor. And in particular, right, one statistic they might point to is, look at China, right? When China was communist and socialist and all that good stuff, people were dirt poor. In the last 20 or 30 years, 600 million people have been lifted out of poverty in China. Half of those people who've been lifted out of poverty in China are women, and that's happened because China is embracing trade. And obviously there's a lot of room for progress and a lot of things in China, but they would say, people aren't starving there anymore. Kids can go to school, and the liberals would say that's a good thing. All right, so that is a very quick summary of how these different paradigms of international relations think about theories of international political economy.